Charles Oliveira's extraordinary journey in the UFC. If you ask any hardcore mixed martial arts fan why they love it so damn much, they'll likely provide you with a laundry list of why it's the best sport on the planet. Chances are one of the reasons they're so enamored with MMA is because, unlike boxing, if you incur multiple losses, you can still rise to the top of the game and attain super stardom. And if they cite that reason as to why MMA is an addiction for them, there's also a very good chance they'll drop the name Charles "Do Bronx" Oliveira as an example. That's because Oliveira has had one of the most extraordinary journeys in the UFC the promotion has ever seen. A jaw-dropping, thrilling journey which has seen Oliveira go from being written off as a gatekeeper who couldn't score the big win to establishing himself as one of the most vicious, dangerous finishers in the game and one of the top lightweights of his generation. How's that for a comeback story? Now, before we get into breaking down Oliveira's awe-inspiring journey, if you enjoy this video, be sure to like it and subscribe to KO Central MMA. Alright, with that little piece of business taken care of, let's dive into the remarkable story of Do Bronx. Oliveira's early UFC days and the Featherweight chapter. Way back in 2010, Oliveira made his way to the UFC as a heralded lightweight prospect from Brazil, armed with a 12-0 record. Early on, Do Bronx delivered on that hype big time by tapping out the ridiculously tough and rugged Darren Elkins in his UFC debut. Then Oliveira went on to submit TUF winner Efrain Escudero. Remember him? And the buzz around Do Bronx continued to build. But in December of that year, Oliveira was booked to fight one of the hardest outs in the game, the Iron Man, Jim Miller. At the time, Miller was riding a 5-fight winning streak, and he had firmly established himself as a perennial contender in the lightweight division. A win for Do Bronx would have served as a massive warning shot across the lightweight bracket's bow. Unfortunately for Oliveira, however, Miller caught him with a sneaky knee bar not long into the fight, and Do Bronx's undefeated record was a thing of history. Losing to Miller, one of the toughest and most well-rounded lightweights on the roster, was no reason for Oliveira to hang his head in shame. But after being stopped by fan favorite Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone 2 fights later, Oliveira decided to make the drop to 145 pounds. Initially, it looked like Oliveira had made the right decision, as he rattled off highlight reel submission wins over Eric Wisely and another TUF winner in Jonathan Brookins. But in the coming months, Oliveira would come up short in back-to-back fights, and a negative narrative around Do Bronx began to take root. The Brazilian fighter failed to make weights for his 2012 clash with longtime featherweight contender Cub Swanson. Missing weight was one thing, but Oliveira was quickly KO'd by Swanson, raising questions about Charles' viability as a top contender. Do Bronx was booked to fight former lightweight champ, the legendary Frankie Edgar next, and while the fight was super entertaining, Oliveira lost by unanimous decision. All of a sudden, talk about Oliveira being a title contender at 145 started to dissipate. Now, Oliveira did proceed to launch a comeback run, and he won 4 straight, showcasing the heart and determination that he would become renowned for later in his career. But since Oliveira missed weight again during the stretch for his 2014 fight with the hard-hitting Jeremy Stephens, the streak lost a bit of its luster. Oliveira proceeded to battle future featherweight champ and great Max Holloway in 2015. The pivotal fight ended in disastrous fashion for Do Bronx, however, as a throat injury brought the fight to a halt less than 2 minutes in. While the bout ended on account of a freak injury, the narrative that Do Bronx folds in big fights really started to gain steam. The BJJ black belt rebounded yet again by submitting Miles Jury in his next outing, but also, yet again, Oliveira missed weight, fueling his critics' fire.
His second of the year! This guy continues to...
Back-to-back submission losses to Anthony Pettis and Ricardo Lamas followed, and by 2017, few people, if any, were talking about Do Bronx as a featherweight contender, much less a future champ and superstar. the awe-inspiring rise to lightweight contention. On account of his well-documented issues making 145 pounds, Oliveira had missed weight in 3 of his last 6 fights. DuBronx returned to lightweight in 2017. Oliveira buzzed the MMA world again by tapping out former Bellator champ Will Brooks in the opening round. But in his next outing, he ran into the vicious elbows of Paul Felder, and as the year ended, there was no talk about DuBronx being a threat for the 155-pound crown. As 2018 began, Oliveira's fights were widely viewed as being of the must-see variety, since DuBronx was a well-documented finisher who was born to make highlights reels. But at the same time, the theory Oliveira couldn't win the big fight and that he was a choker who lacked heart was far-reaching at this juncture. Little did Oliveira's detractors and critics know, however, that they were about to witness one of the greatest runs in lightweight history. DuBronx proceeded to rattle off 4 straight submission wins, which included avenging his 2010 loss to the Iron Man, Jim Miller.
And the crowd are going absolutely crazy.
Not only that, Oliveira broke the record for most submission victories in UFC history at this juncture, with 11. Stoppage victories over Nick Lentz and Jared Gordon followed, demonstrating that DuBronx was far more than just a submission specialist. Thanks to his time at the world-famous Shoot Boxing Gym, Oliveira had added even more finishing weapons to his already stacked tool belt of techniques. While hardcore fans and pundits were taking notice of Oliveira's remarkable run as he continued to add his name to the UFC history book, still, most people were not talking about DuBronx becoming the lightweight king. That started to change, however, when Oliveira dominated Tony Ferguson in 2020. Although Ferguson's best days are behind him here in 2023, when he faced Oliveira at UFC 256, El Cucuy had lost only 1 fight in approximately 8 years, and that was to Justin Gaethje. No shame in that. Oliveira was well known for his back takes and chokes, or even pulling guard, but against Ferguson, he put his wrestling to work. After 15 minutes, there was no doubt that DuBronx had moved his winning record to 8 and that he was knocking on the door for a title shot. On account of Khabib Nurmagomedov's retirement, the UFC lightweight title was up for grabs, and the UFC tapped Oliveira to fight Michael Chandler in May 2021. Despite all the finishes, all the wins Oliveira had recorded at that juncture, many people were still expecting DuBronx to come up short in the biggest fight of his career. Oliveira ate some heavy shots in the opening round of the thrilling contest, but the Brazilian fighter never folded, and DuBronx came back in round 2 and finished the powerful wrestler with a brutal series of strikes. In doing so, Oliveira laid claim to the lightweight crown and punted the narrative that had followed him for years. DuBronx could win the big fight, and he could do so through adversity. Not only that, Oliveira added yet another record to his already stacked resume by becoming the fighter with the most finishes in UFC history, 17. Superstardom arrives. Now armed with the UFC's lightweight crown, Oliveira entered a new level of fame. Fans had always loved DuBronx for his aggressive and finishing style, but on account of his winning streak and championship win, Oliveira's fan base exploded. Case in point, here in 2023, DuBronx has nearly 7 million followers on Instagram. Not bad for a dude who in 2016 was written off as a journeyman gatekeeper for the featherweight division. Oliveira wasn't done taking out top-tier fighters. In fact, arguably the 2 biggest wins of his career were about to follow. In December 2021, Oliveira once again demonstrated resilience and heart in his thrilling fight with Dustin Poirier and finished the lightweight star with a rear naked choke in round 3. In May 2022, Oliveira did take some heat for missing weight for a bout with the always tough and entertaining Justin Gaethje. But his critics were once again silenced when Oliveira battled through some pounding shots early on in the fight and dropped Gaethje around the 3-minute mark. DuBronx seized on his opportunity and locked up his historic 16th submission win by finishing Gaethje with a rear naked choke. There's been no shortage of people who've heaped praise on Oliveira's jiu-jitsu game over the years, and you can understand why.
Oliveira.
Oliveira certainly wearing most of the damage early on.
Case in point, not long ago, Henry Cejudo had this to say about do Bronx's Galaxy-class grappling. "He's super witty with his submission," Cejudo said. "The best submission specialist that the UFC has ever offered, even above Damian Maia. This guy is able to transition into a variety of different submissions, and he's good at everything. If there's one area that I could say he's 100% at, typically I don't do this because nobody's 100, his submission game. It's hard to argue with that, no? I mean, the facts do not lie. In addition to holding the record for the most submissions in UFC history, the vaunted grappler holds the records for most submissions in the UFC's lightweight division, 10, and for the most subs in the featherweight division, 6. Yeah, that's not someone like 98% of fighters on this planet want to mess around with on the ground. Now, Oliveira's reign as the lightweight champ came to a halt in October 2022 as he became the latest victim to fall against Islam Makhachev. Although Makhachev is widely regarded as one of the best pound-for-pound fighters on the planet, once again there were some people who once again closed the book on do Bronx's contending days. But Oliveira violently ripped that book back open at the recent UFC 289 event by taking out Beneil Dariush in the first round, a man who had won 8 straight before running into do Bronx. The finish was Oliveira's 20th in the octagon, setting another record. Further, here we are, well over a decade into Oliveira's UFC run, and he remains atop the promotion's lightweight division, one of the most stacked in all of MMA. Conclusion. As we've thoroughly documented in this video, there are plenty of reasons to call Oliveira one of the greatest lightweights of his generation. In fact, there are some who believe do Bronx belongs in the lightweight GOAT debates. Case in point, not long ago, Aljamain Sterling had this to say about the star. "Greatest of all time, the GOAT, what's the criteria for that?" Sterling asked. "Is it just accolades? Because if it's just accolades, Charles Oliveira has a pretty damn good resume. From title defenses, style points on finishes, been in the game longer." "So for me, I think he has to be within that conversation," Sterling added. "You have to include Charles Oliveira in that against Khabib. The next best thing right now seems like it's Makhachev closing in."
Islam Makhachev.
So much pressure that the moment he cleared the...
"I'm really looking at title defenses and then winning streak as well. Not like your entire career, I'm talking like in the UFC. Getting those types of win streaks in the UFC, it's very difficult to do. And seeing someone bounce back from an L the way that Oliveira has done time and time again in his career, there's something to be said about that." Yup, there's a lot to say about Aljamain, no question, but what do you think? Does do Bronx deserve to be cited in the greatest of all time debates? And do you think Oliveira can avenge his loss to Makhachev and hoist UFC gold one more time? Let us know in the comments section, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to KO Central MMA.